Hello and welcome to the El Camino studio. Today we're going to do the last part of our pencil crayon coloring of the Saint Jean Pied de Port picture out of the Camino coloring book. In parts 1 and 2 of the coloring lesson, we started by putting light washes of color over the whole picture. We started with the yellow, the orange, the browns, the greens, and the blue. So now we're getting to the point where getting closer to the end of the drawing. So this time, instead of spending time doing the work on the whole drawing, I'm just going to make a small detail and work with that. In the previous lessons, we were every so often sitting back and doing a squint test of our drawing. And by doing that, we saw where the drawing was overworked and underworked, and where it becomes very flat and not very three-dimensional. So now, before you start, do the squint test, and you'll see if the drawing is alive or too flat and dead. If you got areas that are too dark, so do the squint test before you start. Well, you've been working on this drawing now for quite some time, so I'm pretty sure you can recognize the little detail that I'm using. If you don't, it's the corner where the bridge meets the building on the left side of the drawing. All of the colors we're using on this drawing are now on the paper in a light wash. So what we're doing now is to punch up the drawing a little bit and get it a little more three-dimensional. So we're working on small little areas at a time and making sure we don't press too heavy and just build up the saturation of the colors a little stronger. This little piece of the bridge is good because it has direct light and indirect light, and it has a little bit of shadow. So I'm just going to get to the point where our original drawing leaves off, and we'll emphasize and build up the strength of the drawing. When we look around our world, we look at objects and we look at nature and everything. There is never complete areas that are uniform in color. There's always variations. Even when you look at a wall in your room that from one side to the other, it's not the same. I had a teacher and professor in university that taught color, and he had a painting business on the side, and he used to paint houses. And he said when people asked him to paint a room white, he used 4 different colors of white on the different walls. And he said that was the only way that when you enter the room, that all the walls look the same. So with that in mind, this is the approach we're going to take to the final touch-ups of the drawing. We're going to try to break up that monotony of uniform surfaces by introducing the variations over the whole surface and the variations of the materials and minerals and whatever composition of what it is that we're drawing, the variations in, like the blocks here, the bricks on the building. No two of them are the same, and they're natural stones, so they're all different. So we want to get that little variation. We want to get the variation of the light and the variation inside the shadows, because the shadows are never black. They're always something less. So we're going to go over the picture step by step, and we're going to start with the yellow, the lightest color. We always work from light to dark. So we're going to go over the whole picture and use our yellow and bring out a little bit more of the yellow where it's needed. Next we'll go to the orange, then the red, and the green, and the browns, the light and the dark brown, and move on to the blue. And once we've got to that point, we'll do another squint test, and then we'll go on to introducing a black pencil. What makes Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port such an interesting little town to draw, and gives it its charm, is it's old. There's very little that is new and pristine. There's always a level of decay in everything you look at. It's been around for a long time. There's cracks in it, and there's bricks have shifted and broken off, and irregularities of all sorts. So as you go through the different colors, think about including some irregularities into the drawing. Put in some cracks here and there, and blemishes, and even the difference in weathering of the shutters and the construction. Now is the time when you're going through the colors to add these little details. It's better to add them in each of the colors, introduce a little bit of each color into these irregularities, and that'll give a sense of uniformity, and ties the whole drawing a little bit more together. If you just try to do these irregularities last with a black pencil or just one color, they will stand out, and you lose that beautiful transparency that we're getting by layering. Feel free to add more details to the drawing as you wish. There's no this is your drawing, so you can add more decay and shadows. Alter the drawing as much as you like. It's your drawing, and you don't have to make a mirror image of what I'm doing. Just enjoy it. Okay, now I've started with the pencil. I'm just using an ordinary HB2 pencil, which is the most common pencil that you have around the house. The HB is the middle of the road. It's not too hard and not too soft. So it gives you quite a nice medium dark line. The softer the lead, like a 6B or a 2B or a 4B, that is a softer lead, and that'll give you much more of a black line. You can't get as precise a line as you can with a harder pencil, but it gives you more black. The other end, the H's are a hard lead, and they give you a much sharper line, but it also becomes much lighter. So for this kind of drawing, I think the HB2 is all you really need. One thing you'll notice right away when you're working with a pencil, that it is somewhat much softer than the pencil crayons. The graphite is transferred so much more easily. So this is a stage in the drawing where you really have to be careful and work sparingly. It doesn't take much to overpower the drawing with the black of the pencil. So it's important here to work slowly, step back and look at it and see where it's going. It's hard to judge sometimes. You can see on the brickwork there, it looks rather, the joints look rather heavy, but we'll get to that a little later on. But just work slowly and just don't overdo it, because the pencil tends to overpower very easily. What we're not going to do with the pencil is we're not going to put any kind of washes over larger areas. We're strictly going to use a pencil for the extreme dark shadows and just help bring those dark areas a little stronger. But we're not going to do any washes with the gray. Nothing will take the color and the brightness and lightness out of your drawing than a wash of pencil. When in doubt of how far to go, it's always better to do less. You can always go back and add more to it. So we're almost at the end of the black pencil. So now we're going to varnish the drawing. Varnishing is when you rub the drawing to smooth out the graphite and the color onto the drawing. I'm going to illustrate this varnishing on a piece of watercolor paper. Watercolor paper has a much more tooth, which is the roughness of the surface. And it'll be a little bit more easier to see what the varnishing does to the drawing. So once I've finished with this, then we'll get on to the watercolor paper. What you'll need for this is just a few pieces of paper towel. Paper towel will work just nicely. Okay, here's my watercolor paper. I'm using 140-pound watercolor paper, which is quite substantially much rougher than the drawing paper that we're using. So I'm just going to put on a couple of thin washes of brown, and you can see that you can see much more of the paper coming through. The pencil graphite and the color is not going everywhere, because the nature of the paper is that it's rough, and you're only putting the color on the tops, the high points of the paper. It's not reaching the crevices in the paper. So that's what the varnishing does. When we rub it, we're forcing that color into those crevices. When I'm doing a drawing that don't care, or it doesn't have to last, I just use my finger to do the rubbing. But it's not a good idea to do that, because all the oils in your skin are transferred to the paper, and it'll darken over time. So if you're going to do a drawing that you want to stay as it is, then use a paper towel. There are specialized varnishing tools, but they're not really necessary. The rubbing softens the drawing and smooths out all the color. And now when we compare our final drawing to the original one I did, you'll see how close you came. All of the techniques that we've done in this drawing you can apply to all your other drawings, and they will be much more interesting. Always underplay the intensity. Less is usually more. You don't need to overdo it. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and we'll be having subsequent lessons, and the next one we'll be doing will be page 2 of the Camino coloring book, and that is a landscape of the Rioja district of Spain. This one has a lot more green, so it'll be a little bit different. So that's all for now, and I hope you enjoyed it, and we will be back.